Hello, welcome, Eric. Welcome to the show.
Tiago, thank you so much. I've already enjoyed our conversation pre-recording, so I'm pretty excited to jam with you here today.
Totally. Yeah, we are just chatting a little bit, and you just told me about a very crazy story. So, you interview top CEOs in the fitness and wellness industry. Tell us what you just telling me just now about like smoking alarm going on and crazy thing
Yeah,
around that interview.
yeah, it was really, I think it's when you in this post-pandemic world, right, where everyone's kind of at home and you're doing a lot of recordings remotely.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen, who's in the house, or what's happening. And it was the CEO of Bowflex, which I've actually had on. It was the second time, but it only took about 10 minutes for everything to go sideways. And it was such a big interview. It was like, my power glitched out, had to come back on. Then like 2 minutes later, his smoke detector went off and we hit pause. We're like, it's okay. And then like 3 minutes later, the smoke detector went off again. So the smoke detector went off three times. And what was just fun about it is we were both just laughing. We're like, God, I can't believe this is happening. But then when I listened to the job that my editor did with it, she had a lot of work to do on that one, right? It turned out so good, in my opinion. Like it was so raw and it was just funny. We're laughing, like, I can't believe that just happened.
Yeah.
And that and clipping in and out and actually rehashing some ideas that were really important.
Hmm.
It turned out to be really good. I was really obviously anxious during the interview to get this thing done and maybe
Yeah.
reschedule, but we just pushed through it. It turned out well.
Yeah, I was just doing an interview here for this podcast, and suddenly my Mac just restarted out of the blue, and it's always so awkward. And it's of course it's worse for the editor. I'm not editing this podcast, so it's my co-founder. He does that, but like, how do you come back from that as well, right? Like, especially when it's your fault. Like, if it's the guest, for me it's fine, but if it's something, either like my Mac restarted or the like some sound going on, I always feel embarrassed. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with your power going out and then restarting? And where do you restart from? Even like, do you restart from the same question? Do you ask the question again? How do you do that?
Yeah, yeah, really good question. I mean, it's not the first time it's happened. I've done
Yeah.
well over 750 interviews now. But I think
Whoa,
here's the thing: is like
it's a
it's
lot.
only weird if you make it weird, right? So
Mm.
like if something
Yeah.
happens, if you handle like professional, be like, so sorry, this stuff happens. Let's just pick up from this point and then keep going. It's
Yeah.
almost like it never happened. So it's how you react to it. I think is the most critical thing. And of course, if it's the first time it happens, you're going to naturally freak out, especially if it's a big interview you've been prepping for. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
but I think that's it. It's only weird if you make it weird.
That's a good point. How do you make your guests, so 700 interviews, that's crazy. You have a
It's
lot
a
of
lot.
experience. How do you make your guests comfortable
Hmm.
before starting? Because it can always be a bit awkward. Some people get nervous.
Hmm.
So do you have like a way to get people in the mood and in the zone, and get like comfortable speaking
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah, a little bit. It's different every person. And, for the record, you did a great job before this. I think, just
Nice.
building rapport. Um,
Thank
I
you.
think that's it. I think it's just being calm, asking them how their day's going, basic questions. Where are you located? What's new in your world? What are you most passionate about right now? Kind of giving
Hmm.
them preparation. I think, having them prepared, I always go through like, do you know my audience? And I kind of start with that. Like, let me explain who
Mm.
this podcast is. And, maybe you're familiar, maybe you're not. This is who we're talking to. This is the flow that I was thinking of for the interview.
Hmm.
And my favorite question is like, is there anything you woke up this morning feeling especially passionate about? And
Okay.
and
The
then
fun
going
one.
from there. But I think asking those questions and just calming down and
Hmm.
just having a really good demeanor about yourself and not being anxious yourself. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah. Do you still get nervous after 700 interviews?
Um, I got nervous recently when we launched the Athletech Unscripted podcast.
Hmm.
It's a big platform in the industry. They're kind of like the Bloomberg of fitness and wellness. And the
Okay.
co-founder and I decided to start an industry podcast, and it was the F45 CEO, which is a big deal if you know the industry. They've been under a lot of heat from Wall Street and many others. So it was really good. But within the first minute, I was doing the introduction and I mispronounced Athletech. I gave the wrong year. I said it was
Oh,
2023. It's 2024. So it was like I could
okay.
tell I was
I
nervous.
understand that.
Yeah,
I
yeah. It was
mean,
just like these little things
yeah,
I couldn't
yeah.
do it right, and I could tell. But after that initial thing, I settled in and got back into my
Hmm.
normal routine. So normally, no. I mean, if I'm doing my own podcast, I won't. But that one was a little bit. I wanted
Hmm.
to really make an impact with that first one. I
Yeah,
just kind of spaced out.
yeah, totally. Okay. I mean, even it gets to all of us, right? Even with that experience, sometimes it just also depends on the way we wake up. Sometimes we feel loosen up and ready. Sometimes we feel like, yeah, the words don't come out right and everything.
Fully agree.
So, which I know that you have a lot of podcasts and
Mhm.
a lot of experience. Which podcast do you want to pitch us today? If you have like 30 seconds to pitch us one of your shows, which one will that be? And just go for it. Do the
Yeah.
pitch.
Yeah. I mean, the Future of Fitness is my flagship show, the one I've been doing for 7 years now. And, the way I always put it to people is that I always use the Gretzky quote of I want to help the fitness industry skate to where the puck is going, right? Not where it is today. Like I want everybody who listens to my show to be informed and see what's coming around the
Mm-hmm.
corner. And that means I get to interview some of the best and
That's
brightest
cool.
from, company executives to um, founders of startups and entrepreneurs and thought leaders in health sciences. So there's so much going on in our industry. It's so dynamic right now that it's just really fun for me to get to interview this wide breadth of people
Mm-hmm.
who are leaders in our industry.
How did you started, or how did you first enter in this industry, wellness and fitness? Like, where did the passion come from?
Yeah, I was, well, I've always been an athlete. So fitness, human performance, it's always kind of been in my life really since the age of
Mm-hmm.
5. But I was in corporate America for 10 years. And, very simply, I got a text message from a college teammate that said, "Hey, do you want to open a gym?" And,
Hmm.
I was like, I was done with corporate sales. I didn't want to be my own boss. So I just sent a reply text back, and this is 2008. Said, yeah, I do. And, within 6 months, we were opening our first location, and it was a CrossFit gym, which is now a world renowned brand. And that was it. So I
Wow.
started really in '08, opened a tiny little gym, started training people and expanded into another location, and then sold those in 2017. And that's when I started the podcast.
Oh, that's cool. What is the name of what is the brand?
Uh, the gym was CrossFit Pacific Coast in Santa Barbara,
Mm-hmm.
California. And then we opened another one with a different friend, with a different colleague called Lighthouse Fitness, which was kind of a hybrid um, model that unfortunately didn't make it through the pandemic. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, congrats as well for the entrepreneurial spirit. That is a great story,
Oh, thank you.
and just with the text changing your life like that. That must have been also very scary. But how did the podcast kind of aligned itself with this business, and why
Mhm.
did you even decided to start a podcast?
Well, I think there's a little bit of me, Tiago, I used to work at radio stations in my
Oh,
early
okay.
20s. So I've always had this like fascination with the audio world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
content and all that. But I wanted to start a podcast actually when I owned my gym, and I recorded one full episode of talking to my head coach about her philosophies and her life and all that. And then I realized at the end of the recording that I had the mute button on the entire time. So that was my first foray. And I was like, well, let me just shelf this for a little bit. And then I circled back to it when I sold my gyms in 2017. My wife and I went nomadic for about a year or
Oh,
two.
cool.
So, we just sold my businesses, rented out our house, put everything in our car, grabbed our dog, and we just started moving from, looking for our next place to live. But I needed a way to kind of connect with my industry as I was working remotely, right? So I
Right.
had some plans
Mm-hmm.
on how to do business coaching and consulting and all this stuff, but I needed some way to kind of build a platform for myself. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I love it. I love the interview. I love connecting with people. So podcasting, really turned out to be something that was so useful in my business career. But really, I started because I was very curious about where the industry was
Mm-hmm.
going. I wanted to connect with more people, and I needed something I could do remotely. So it kind of fit all those
Yeah.
those those check boxes.
Yeah. Are you monetizing it? Can you
I am.
somehow monetize it?
Yeah,
How do you?
I directly monetize it through sponsorships and partnerships, um, and I also kind of indirectly uh, monetize it through it's a very, like I said, I get to interview very high level people,
Mm-hmm.
And I started a service last year where it's a kind of I guess, a media placement agency where I do,
Mm-hmm.
I place people on industry podcasts. So it's become also a lead generation tool that way. And it's also just brought, kind of brought my name out there and within the industry in a way
Okay.
that I never would have done on my own.
So you interview people and then you recommend them to other podcasts, or how does that work?
Yeah. So people can find, if you want to, it's podcastcollective.io is the website,
Mm-hmm.
but it's three things. So if Tiago, if you're a entrepreneur or a
Yeah.
founder or
Mm-hmm.
something like that within our industry, if you engage with me, I would coach you on how to be a great interview, right?
Okay.
All the skills, the storytelling, all of those things. Would also create the media assets, so a detailed media kit, a landing page
Okay.
that we could drive traffic to, and then I'll start introducing and placing you on different strategically placing you onto industry podcasts
Ah,
similar to my own.
that's very
So we're
interesting.
kind of like a PR agency, but we're just very, very narrowly focused to
Mm-hmm.
podcasts within the fitness, health, and wellness space because I think there's huge potential for that. And then on the
Yeah.
other side, I'm building a community of podcasters within our industry. That I think
Great.
we have about 30 of them now. And my goal for this year is to help them, A, with discovery, build their
Mm-hmm.
audiences, and B, monetize. I think we can build out
Yeah.
a sponsorship syndicate.
I love this. I love how like how you came up with so many different ways to monetize a podcast. You know, sponsorships. This kind of agency where you help people build their personal brand, a community, which is also something that works really well. Do you have any example of someone that you helped? And like, what was the before when someone came to you and say, "Hey, I want to help, to build my personal brand,"
Mm-hmm.
and the after, your like, how did they improve?
Yeah, yeah. I think probably Sam Miller is a really good example. So I've known Sam for over 3 years now. He's the founder of a technology called Proteus Motion, which is completely redefining how we look at strength training and human movement assessment. It was just
Mm-hmm.
people who, in the States, if you watch Netflix, there was in the Netflix series Quarterback, the technology was highlighted in a big
Mm,
way. But what I've done the work for him is not only get him on really good podcasts that are strategically focused on the audience that he wants to hit, but the introductions to the podcast hosts, as you know, podcast hosts generally, especially if it's an industry podcast, aren't just podcasters. They probably own a business or they have some sort of
yeah,
audience that they built. So these key
totally.
introductions to the podcast hosts and getting them on the media has really significantly helped them grow their business
Mm-hmm.
in a way that people don't really see until they start doing this work. Like podcasting in the world of podcast hosts is a huge opportunity for business development that's relatively untapped. And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding how to do that.
Mm. Yeah, when I asked you if you thought that your podcast was a lead magnet, you said that it was more like a networking opportunity. Allows you to network, allows you to meet people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get these CEOs and top people in your industry to be your guests? Like, what is the approach? How do you find them? What message do you send? How does that work?
Yeah, it's so now it's not a challenge anymore, right? I have some really good relationships with PR agencies who have really good
Mm-hmm.
clients. Jack Taylor PR, Moxie PR. They have companies like Aura and
Ah, okay.
Hyperice and you know uh, gosh, you name it. They work with a lot of executives, so that's a really healthy
Mm-hmm.
relationship that I foster and value quite a bit. I use LinkedIn a ton. That's
Okay.
been really useful in getting people on. And I think perception can be very powerful, right? Like if
Mm.
someone's listening, they're a podcast host, and you send out to the world that you have a very powerful podcast, even if your
Yeah.
listenership may not be where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Um, Almost nobody asks, Tiago. Like almost
Yeah.
nobody
That's
asks
true.
what my
Yeah.
numbers are, right? And they haven't since the beginning of time or beginning of my podcast. So I think there's just knowing who you're trying to get. A lot of times social media DMs are a good way to do it. Going to the website if you really who you want. Going to the website, hit the
Mm-hmm.
contact form. But I think people are very open to doing interviews. Um, Much more than just hey, can I get a meeting with you and pick your brain for 20
Yeah.
minutes, right? No one wants to do that anymore. But if you
That's
want to
that.
interview them, that's different.
I totally agree. You know, my first podcast, The Wannabe Entrepreneur, was about just interviewing other entrepreneurs, and uh, most of them, they were, you know, leads in their industry, and they would never agree to just have a chat with me for like 30 minutes,
Yeah.
like 1 hour, without anything in return. But the moment I said, hey, but it's for my podcast, and you're absolutely right, no one ever asked how many
No one.
downloads, which was really good because I didn't have many. But and they'll be like, yeah, sure, let's talk. And then for you have them for 1 hour
Yeah.
just asking all the questions I want.
Hmm.
And I think people don't realize how powerful this is. Like, this
Very.
has been my course. This was a master course, better than going to, you know, college or doing any course like this, because this was my MBA of entrepreneurship right there. And it was very simple to put up and set up and everything. But how do you, like, what is the message you send them? Because you are still cold calling them, right? If it's through like a PR, or if you know them,
Hmm.
and like, you know, after 700 interviews, you know, they already know you. Especially in the beginning, how can someone that is starting in their own industry, how can someone reach out, and what should that message be to get the, I guess.
I think the biggest thing is have do a little bit of research. You don't have to do a ton, right?
Mm-hmm,
But maybe I'm trying to think of something recently. Like if you have a guest that you maybe recently heard on another podcast or read an article about or did
mm-hmm,
something, like whenever you reach out to them, keep it brief. And I always, like, if I'm reaching out on LinkedIn, and people have been on LinkedIn know it's the land of spam messages,
mm,
but I
totally.
always even start with, like, before you start reading, like, this is not spam. I'm a real person. I'll just state that. Like, I just listened to your podcast, interview on XYZ podcast. Thought it was great. I'd love to have you on my show. Here's a little bit about what we're doing. If you're interested, please let me know. We can get on a call and discuss topics and schedule a time. So I keep it pretty
Mm,
simple, but I try to keep it very personalized, and really state something that shows, like, hey, I actually did some work. Right. I'm not just
right.
spamming you to have you on my podcast, but I actually really am intrigued by these
Mm-hmm.
topics.
Yeah, this is a unique message, right? Like, this is
Yes.
not a
No.
copy paste
Nope.
message that I'm sending to everyone.
Take the
So you
time.
really tailor, yeah.
Yes. Take the time.
Hmm. Makes total sense. And I think sometimes people are lazy and they think, yeah, let me just send, quantity is better than quality. But if you're, you know, wasting time anyway, sending messages to people, it's better to send less messages and, you know, get results.
Yes.
So I totally agree. Now, tell me about the next phase. So you have a guest,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you set up the interview? Like, what's your process? Do you send the questions beforehand? Do you have like a pre-call? Like, we already talked a little bit about before the call. How do you
Mm-hmm.
make people comfortable? But I'm interested in knowing if you have a script and how you like set up the interview.
Yeah, so it really depends on the guest. If I'm going to do a really busy CEO or executive, uh, they're not going to want to get on a 30-minute prep call. We're just going to go
Mm,
straight to the interview. But generally, I have my flow, which changes all the time. Is short introduction, get into them kind of telling their backstory, what we call the origin story, how they got to be
mm-hmm,
where they are. And then we start diving into, well, tell me the problem that you're solving, how did that come about?
mm-hmm,
How are you solving it? Then we'll get into, like, tell me what you can about the business. Is this a public company, private company? So I have my own flow. And then, I always leave plenty of time because there's always a rabbit hole that you're going to chase down.
right.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm,
So I have a general framework, but it almost 99% of the time it's going to go a little off
mm-hmm.
script.
Okay. Okay. So you have kind of a storyline that you always follow. And I'm also interested in knowing what happens before you stop recording. Because normally the most interesting conversations happen after you stop
Yeah,
recording. So
absolutely.
do you have like something that you think, okay, I get this as to take feedback, or to connect, or to sell something? Do you have something planned, or you just go with the flow?
I go with the flow. Uh, it's, I like to leave at least 5 minutes,
Mm,
right, to do that. But it is, you're right, it's the most powerful moment. And for people who are, like, using it for business development, that's where all the magic happens, right? It's like,
mm,
hey, and it's a debriefing, like, that was great, how do you feel that went?
mm-hmm,
Kind of getting some insights, this is when it's going to be published. And then, generally I'll throw something in there, like, um, I have something I love to talk. Actually, here's the question. that most people don't ask, right? And this leads to everything else. So this is the gem. Is thank you, Tiago, so much for coming on the show. How can I help you? Like, what do you need help with right now? And
Mm.
that's not just a question that I throw out lackadaisically. It's actually like, well, we're actually looking for a new VP of marketing, or, I'd love to get on more podcast, or whatever it is, whatever the request is. If it's within my power, I actually help them with it. I don't charge anything. I
Mm.
don't look for anything in return, but I will help them with it, because then all of a sudden in their mind, you just became a person of value. Right.
Mm.
And that's the key to me, is like, always look for a way to help first, and then that'll lead to good things. Now you have someone
Yeah.
you can lean on later.
And that is one-on-one networking, right? And
Yeah,
that's the
that's it.
even though like a lot of people don't do it, right?
Nope.
Like networking is about helping others without expecting something in return, and you eventually will have something in return, but you cannot expect it. And I love that. That's a great point. And after you record the interview, after everything's ready, how do you like how do you publish this interview? How
Mhm.
do you repurpose the content? And as well, how like this pod squeeze
Mhm.
helps you in repurposing the content?
Yeah, it's so everything I use Google Drive, and I've been working with the same editor for 4 years. Danny out of the Philippines, she's excellent. And I'll throw everything into so I use Riverside,
Hmm.
record through everything in the Google Drive, and then she does her stuff, and magically it appears one day out in the world.
Oh, that's the
But
best.
I use PodSqueeze primarily for my email newsletter. So I have
Mm.
small but very engaged email list that I want to make sure I'm staying top of mind. So I use it to
Hmm.
summarize the episodes, so I don't have to go back and listen to
Cool.
60 minutes, and then I kind of
Hmm.
filter that my own way, and then I publish the email newsletter. So it's been really time saving tool for that.
Yeah, and email is something that people think is dead, but it's not, and you have a lot of control over it, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like LinkedIn or social media, well,
Yes.
where they basically control your reach. No, with email, they are there and they'll get your message. So I totally advise everyone to do this. It works a lot, and it worked really well as well for our business. Um, as a last question, so let's say someone is starting, they want to start a podcast in their industry for networking, for lead magnets, to monetize it. What would be your advice for both getting started and as well to grow their show?
Yeah, I think getting started is just really kind of fundamentally getting down what you want. The format. Are you going to be doing interviews? How the frequency? Are you going to be doing it remotely, in person? Audio and video. Like, get all the fundamental pieces down, make that decision,
Hmm.
and then just start. Like, that's where most people, like, they get too hung up on the like, really all you really need to get started, I think, is like, you got to
Hmm.
have a title, right? You got to have some artwork, and you got to have a description that can go into iTunes. Like, other
Hmm.
than that, like, everything else is just ways that people get distracted. So I think just getting started as soon as you can. You're never going to love your first 10 episodes. I never want to go back and listen to them ever again. Um, and growing it, I think, is just, I look at it every time I help someone start a podcast. Like, this is a 5-year plan. Okay. This
Hmm.
isn't a 3 month, 6 month, or even a year. Like, you're gonna figure some things out as long as you go. It's a journey. But you do have to. I think the best way to grow a podcast is getting on other podcasts, because, as
Hmm.
someone who listens to a podcast tend to listen to 7.5, 8 different ones,
Yeah.
versus trying to engage people who don't listen to a podcast, which is a little bit more difficult.
Hmm.
So that would be my recommendation: is get started before you're ready, and then try to get on other
Hmm.
people's podcasts.
And how does one do that? How do you get into others podcast?
It's actually pretty simple if you're willing to do some podcast swaps, right? Like, if I said,
Okay.
"Hey, Tiago, why don't you come on my if it made sense, right, for the topics,
Hmm.
why don't you come on my podcast? I'll come on your podcast, and we can do it that way." But
Okay.
other
So
than
you
that,
just find podcasts in your area
hmm
and you reach out to the host and they say like, "Hey,
yeah,
let's do a swap."
yep,
Okay. And that works?
yeah,
And it's like most of them will accept it.
yeah, a lot of them.
Okay. That's a really good tip. I didn't know. Uh that's really cool.
Yeah,
And you're absolutely right, because then you'll get into their market, and their market are podcast listeners, and they will also most likely listen to your podcast. So
correct.
that's a great point. Eric, thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming to the show. Once again, how can we find you? What's
Mhm.
the name of your podcast? Where are your socials?
Yeah. Well, Eric Malzone on LinkedIn, very easy to find there. That's my big social platform. Then you can go to futurefitness.co, which is my website that will be revamped here any day. And then for the placement agency, you can go to podcastcollective.io.
Perfect. All the links will also be in the show notes of this episode. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Tiago.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.